Hey, it's State of State. We got your Nittany Line update. It's a football discussion with Tom and Justin, so kick back and press play.
With former Penn State and NFL defensive back Justin King, I'm Tom Hannafin. This is State of State. Please like, comment, subscribe, rate us, and turn on notifications. Follow us on social media at State of State Pod. Comment on our YouTube channel. And if you haven't done so already, you can become a member of our YouTube channel. For just 99 cents a month, you can get all upcoming episodes of State of State, plus our entire members-only playlist, ad-free, commercial-free. Hit the join button on our homepage or follow the link in the description of this podcast. This podcast is presented by BetOnline. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for all your sports betting action. Baseball season is in full swing, as are the NBA and NHL playoffs. There are so many ways to get in the action with the latest odds, news, and scores, even live in-game betting while the games are being played. With the largest selection of odds on everything from Major League Baseball to the NBA, the NHL, and UFC, BetOnline remains the number one online source for all your sports wagering info. In between games, head over to the BetOnline casino with all the top Vegas-style games, including poker and live casino. Penn State fans, are you feeling confident that the Nittany Lions can win college football's national championship next season? Lock in your futures bet at betonline.ag today. State of State is presented by BetOnline. The game starts here. State of State is a proud supporter of Blue White Outfitters. Blue White Outfitters was created as a retail shop meant to highlight the confidence, competitiveness, and fearlessness of the elite athletes found throughout the history of Penn State University. Check out their Lockdown U and Lawn Boys merchandise today. All sales from Blue White Outfitters directly benefit Penn State student athletes. Also, official State of State merchandise is available now. Support the show and grab State of State t-shirts, hoodies, hats, and more. Visit www.bluewhiteoutfitters.com today. Hi, everyone, and welcome to State of State. I'm Tom Hannafin. He's Justin King. Today, we're reacting to a fantastic article on ESPN.com from Heather Dinich, who does fantastic work covering new Penn State defensive coordinator Jim Knowles, his time at Ohio State, specifically last season, the national championship, his exodus from Columbus, which was awkward, as you can read about on ESPN.com, and then how it came to be that he joined the Penn State Nittany Lions coaching staff, and now what he's doing internally to help obviously get this team ready for 2025, but doing that on both sides of the ball. There were a lot of really fascinating pieces from this. Justin, I know you got a chance to take a look at this a little bit. I want to start off at the top, the understanding that while he was at Ohio State, there was some friction in that, especially that loss in the regular season at Oregon, the Buckeyes losing by a point on the road. There were a lot of questions and finger pointing at the defense. You and I have talked about it before, is that Larry Johnson Sr. had a preference for what he wanted from the defensive line, alignments, play, all that sort of stuff. Jim Knowles differed a bit. There was some friction there. Ryan Day obviously putting the clamps down after that loss to Oregon, especially after the loss to Michigan later on in the season, that it just felt like it became a very tense atmosphere to work in. And then as outlined in this article is that Jim Knowles was seeking actually to re-sign with Ohio State in the lead up to the national championship with Notre Dame, and one lowball offer compared to some of the other offers out there from Oklahoma, Notre Dame especially. And then ultimately he was asked not to come to the parade, and he was like, the writing was kind of on the wall and it felt awkward. So hearing all that stuff, what was your reaction?
I mean, the coaching business is just another cutthroat avenue of the entire sports ecosystem. I mean, we always give a lot of coaches the brunt of the stick when we're talking about, guys pushing players into the portal or they leave for other jobs, but like their industry is just as cutthroat, right? There's only 10 staff jobs and then everybody's vouching for those, and it's more based on relationships. So I think when it becomes business, those things cut a little deeper because you're spending 12, 16 hours a day with these guys for a long time. So it does become deeper than just work associates or anything of that nature, or just someone that like a coworker. Like, no, you build like a real relationship where you're in the mud. So I mean, it's a part of the business, but it's just the nasty part of the coaching industry.
And then in the article, it says James Franklin got a phone call from Jim Knowles, or either Jim Knowles' camp, whichever way it went, at 5 o'clock in the morning, just a handful of days after the national championship game went down. And of course, you take that phone call, and you and I had talked about it a bunch of times, is that Penn State was looking at Danton Lynn, former Letterman, or is a Letterman, and is currently at USC, try to lure him away. Some other names that were in the mix after Tom Allen departed for Clemson. So, I mean, when arguably the best defensive coordinator in the sport drops into your lap and it's like, hey, here's the asking price, very encouraging to hear that Dr. Bendapudi and Pat Kraft immediately were snapping into action and saying yes, as opposed to, $3.1 million annually is a lot of money. It's worth it for Jim Knowles. So to hear him say that he wanted to go to a place where he can make a difference. Now, yes, like I understand the money is important, but he talks about it a bunch in this article. He's like, at my age, it's like, you want to go someplace that you're wanted and someplace that you're going to make a difference. And he clearly saw a place in Penn State. He's like, I want to help get this place get over that 10, 11 win hump, always a bridesmaid, never a bride sort of thing. Mm-hmm. What did you feel about that? Because I just, you hear that from a guy who literally just won the national championship and has done just about everything there is to do.
I mean, you got to take it, I mean, not with a grain of salt, but you got to take on the help. I think more hands on deck. If he's willing to come in, he sees that there's a little gap and he's been there. I think there's a lot of value in best practices or just the gaps that may exist that, I mean, leaders may not see internally, right? When you're just trying to get over a hump, it's just sometimes you got to add a little new ingredients to the recipe.
You mentioned it when Knowles gave his introductory press conferences that he was actively, openly talking about Penn State trying to win a national championship in 2025. And we just haven't heard that from this coaching staff. Like those outward goals specifically for the postseason, you just really don't hear them. And that feeling of this guy's been there, done that, it goes a long way. It seems to have gone a long way with quarterback Drew Allar, who it's so funny in this offseason cycle. I don't know how you have seen it, but like Drew Allar's become this really polarizing subject in college football. And that I would argue he's one of the best, if not the best, returning starting quarterbacks in the sport going into 2025. There are other people who are like, oh, he's overhyped and he dwindles in the big moments. And I can see both sides. Like, I understand, yes, like he has struggled in the big moments, but like you can't fault what he is. And now you have Jim Knowles, who within this article explains that Jim Knowles has given him essentially what Ohio State scouting reports have been for the last few years on him. And seeing that Venn diagram of here's what Penn State's coaches were telling Drew of you're good and you're bad. And then here's what Jim Knowles / Ohio State were seeing of you're good and you're bad. And here's where they overlap. You've inevitably played under coaches that you've played against. So when you do get that feedback, how difficult is it to take and then implement?
I don't think it's difficult when that's what the information you're looking for. I mean, that's the
If
thing.
You're looking for it, and Drew is looking for it.
100%. I mean, in the offseason, that's one of the major things with programs that get better is that true self-evaluation and not, patting yourself to make sure you don't hurt your own ego, but really getting down to the tendencies that you are unaware of, your favorite things that you like to do in crunch time, things where you think you're zigging, zagging when you've really been zagging over and over again. But like sometimes those things happen because football is a very emotional game. There's a lot of things that even when you go to the numbers, don't tell the whole story. It's how someone experiences you. So I think there's a very strong value in having someone outside that's competed against you tell you exactly where you're strong and weak at.
Well, especially Ohio State and Michigan, and I guess you can now throw Oregon into that mix of those teams within the Big Ten that Penn State is banging its head up against the proverbial ceiling. Ohio State being, I think, first and foremost in the minds of fans, to get that immediate feedback from the guy who was working against you the last few years is incredible. And I was saying it before, how do you feel about this polarizing view of Drew Allar as we're entering 2025?
I mean, he's been number one quarterback since coming out of high school. So I think he's gotten some practice dealing with a level of expectation and pressure and people saying that he's not good or overrated or he crumbles in big moments. And I feel like all season I've been just correcting ignorant fans of like, hey, do you know what a quarterback looks like? But I guess everybody is kind of lost on what NFL teams are looking for in a quarterback. I guess NFL teams are lost on what they're looking for in a quarterback. So who knows?
The draft was interesting. But I think there's that divide of Penn State fans who can understand the draft value, what he can be in the pros, versus the fans who are like, I want to see him do it now at Penn State, especially in 2025.
For sure.
But him getting that type of feedback from Jim Knowles has got to be incredible. And especially we've talked so much about them trying to revamp the wide receiver room, 3 transfers at the top of that wide receiver room, as far as we can tell from the outside looking in. But from what you understand, being so close to the program, how has Jim Knowles fit in to your ear?
So it's interesting when you get different coaches that come into programs, they typically try to somewhat, I'll say not insecure coaches, but coaches that are trying to, fill out the shoes or let their presence be known, whether this is how they like to recruit, this is how I like to coach, whether they're giving the evals of what, their group is doing and really trying to cement themselves. And then there's guys that come and it's just like, I am who I am, and I'm going to sit back and kind of watch things unfold. Almost like, I'm not going to say like a boss, but like just a very calm, sure of himself type of person from the different coaches that I've seen come in. Because again, guys are coming in, they're like, we got to fix this. And maybe it was different situations, right? If he's coming in understanding that the gap is yay big and I just need to come in and understand what they understand, and it's more about the execution and merging of ideas. It's a different approach, because he comes in and he's sitting back, watching, and then injecting his information when he needs to, from what I've seen, a couple of practice that I checked out. And that's a little bit different versus seeing Coach K last year when he first got there. And it was like, not like a madman, but he was going around and it was just like, oh, like a charismatic, just a more youthful approach to the players. And that was a contrast to the previous OC. So like, I don't know if it's always just isolated on the one coach, but if there's a dichotomy between the coach that left and what they're trying to void they're trying to fill.
To the point you're saying, I wouldn't describe what Andy Kotelnicki did last year as a complete overhaul of the offense, but it was different, very different.
Talking personality, right, that they bring into the building, because I think that's where the execution and coaching really comes to fulfillment, right? And talks about Mike before, it's like, oh, it's a little uptight how he dealt with the coach. And then, I mentioned that even with Coach K when I first met him, was like, oh, he has like a charisma about him that I like in offensive coordinators, to be able to take those risks when you need them.
Yeah, but he certainly put his fingerprints all over the offense. It wasn't,
1000%.
Hey, here's the playbook and here's what Mike Yurcich did. Just kind of put a couple of little, strokes of paint on it, so to speak. He made it his own. He changed things quite a bit, obviously utilizing the same formations that, James Franklin historically has liked to use, the same packages he likes to use, the personnel that Penn State had to offer, but he pretty much found what Penn State's strengths and weaknesses were on offense, and he worked accordingly. It feels like Jim Knowles, and again, based on this article, is that he sees a defensive product that has been consistently very good, not just under James Franklin, but for decades. So he realized he didn't have to do a major overhaul or a gut job of any kind. And it's like, yeah, there's going to be some terminology that changes, but you also got some great quotes in there from defensive tackle Zane Durant, defensive end Denai Dennis Sutton, in that they're doing a lot more learning, in that he's like, everybody has far more responsibilities, more of a pro style defense is the way that they described it. And I wouldn't know firsthand with Tom Allen and Manny Diaz if you, Justin, would describe those as pro style defenses, but what can that leap be like from more of a conventional college defense to what Jim Knowles is attempting to implement?
Pro style, say pro style, I don't know if you say more stagnant or traditional blitzes, but I think the thing that made Manny's defense interesting is like, when you're in college, you have different personnel groupings and guys that you can move around, and you're supplementing different blitz packages and how you're attacking. Pro style, you're typically dealing with players that you don't have to be as creative with, right? It's like you're finding matchups and you're zeroing in on those matchups. And we're kind of playing straight up across the board and playing at an extremely high level. Not to say that it's just different philosophies. I mean, I think he comes from that standpoint. I wouldn't say like, again pro, like he's had a lot of success in college calling defenses. So, but yeah, I mean, it also comes with coaching top tier players consistently versus sometimes guys have to be a little bit more creative to cover up for talent deficiencies. So, I mean, it's just all coaches are not created equal. So it's just making sure that those things merge.
The way that it seemed to be explained by some of the players is far more individual responsibilities than just kind of a blanket, hey, we're in cover two. And just making it really simple that way, and that there's a lot more responsibilities for each individual across the field, and that's to mask things for the defense against the offense to just make things as confusing as humanly possible. So I can completely understand the route that he's going down, and then it's also been that process for Jim Knowles to evaluate the talent that Penn State has and the best way to utilize that. Now, granted, this is through spring. We've heard about this jack position, which is very similar to Penn State's lion position, utilizing either a safety or a linebacker who's a little bit more of a hybrid and can do a lot of different things. So not unfamiliar to this Penn State defense and its players, but just a different person calling the shots, maybe some different terminology. So I think what I took away from this piece was very encouraging to hear that Jim Knowles is not necessarily doing a major overhaul, is that he's filling in the margins, I guess, so to speak. You know, you're losing Abdul Carter, which is a big deal, and a lot of other pieces that are off to the National Football League. But what he sees is something that's like, I don't have to do much to get this to the next level. So that should be encouraging to Penn State fans. And then especially part of the article was looking at Oregon being your first big test in September at home. You're fortunate about that. Oregon returns 43% of its production from last year. So that's one of the lowest in the nation. So to a degree, it's like, that could set up Penn State for success, but you never know with Dan Lanning in that program. You have seen it for years. They can field something very, very skilled. So I guess my question to you is, like, during the next handful of months, now that spring practices are over, how much more does Jim Knowles really have to do to get this defense to fill in those margins?
I think it's the actual players understanding the defense so that they can play fast. Anytime that you're playing a reactionary side of the ball like defense, where you're reacting to the offense and reading your keys, you just have to be sure and 100% confident in what the expectations are from the coach. I think if he relays those and the attitude in which they play, the expectations on what they're being graded on, I think the guys that Penn State recruits from a standpoint, just the foundation, they're able to take in that information or those expectations and really deliver. That's what I've seen from being able to clock like the talent and it being able to develop. And then that's on the other hand of James bringing in coaches that know how to connect with those guys. So I think as long as they understand what the expectations are when comes time to roll in August, I think they're going to be just fine. Because you got to think they're going to be doing all player-led football activities in the summer. So at this point, this is when you really get your own understanding, because coaching the players all just encoding and decoding communication, right? And so just making sure that you are thinking like your defensive coordinator and understanding the why of his defense and his concepts to be able to play fast and make plays.
The thing that I loved within this article was not just, hey, Jim Knowles getting with Drew Allar and saying, hey, here's how Ohio State played you and scouted you, but also James Franklin detailing how now that winter workouts and spring have come to an end, you've apparently what's gone on internally is Andy Kotelnicki has offered his critique of what Jim Knowles has put out there and vice versa. And James Franklin saying within this piece that he's like, Ohio State, their feeling is kind of like, F your feelings. Like, this is what I see from your defense, good and bad. This is what I see from your offense, good and bad. That self-scouting happens all the time. But he's like, yeah, like we're a little bit more sensitive. Like, you don't want to walk into a meeting room and be like, your coverage schemes suck or something like that. Like, from your experience with coaches, like, how delicate is that self-scouting, that internal sharing of information?
How sensitive are they? I mean, how secure are they? I mean, the real good ones, the secure ones. Question. Yeah, secure. That's probably that is a better question, because the ones that are secure in who they are, they actually encourage healthy conflict. like often. Like they want to argue, they want you to find a hole in what they're doing, and they want to prove you wrong. like there's like a sport within that versus the insecure coach that wants to be the know-it-all and the creative guru, and anything that you point out is going to be solved by some ghost. And then that's when you start to get guys that get angry and start flexing power of being a coordinator in the ranks that you have in coaching. So there's two different profiles of coaches that you deal with. So you see them from all different angles. For me, seeing them recruiting and working with them, but it's just depending on the secure or the insecure coach. Very different responses, by the way.
Oh, sure. And it sounds like, again, the way this article outlined it was that at Ohio State, they're like, we don't really care if your feelings get hurt. Whereas James Franklin is being like, hey, like, we can be respectful of each other and that sort of thing. So it's a different culture. It's a different environment. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yep.
We'll see how it all shakes out. Again, I encourage you to check it out now on ESPN.com. Heather Dinich put together this piece. She's very, very talented, always does really good work. How do you feel about what Jim Knowles is doing thus far? How do you feel about the defense thus far? And this piece of information, especially surrounding Drew Allar. What were you going to say?
Because I would say, like, I mean, even to James' credit, because I would say, like, the way he runs the operation is, I've said it before, it's almost like a coaching, getting your doctorate in coaching or working in football. So the culture, when I say that, it's built into the culture. When I'm saying if someone's secure or insecure, like I'm saying that because everyone's getting challenged in the building and what they bring to the table. Like you can't survive in that building if you're going to be mad if you give them a piece of paper as an adult, 50-year-old, 40-year-old man, and he like marks it up like an English teacher. So like when I'm saying like it's common within the building to get, evaluated or self-scouted internally. So it's maybe an outsider that's coming in might be a different protocol.
No, the old adage is the standard is the standard, and that
standard is the standard.
Used to be raised, and especially if the goal is to win a national championship in 2025, clearly the standard has to go up from here. The recruiting trail continues to be very, very strong for Penn State 2026 and 2027. Hats off to the defensive side of the ball, especially a bunch of linebackers. Dan Connor and company have done a really nice job in that department. So we'll see how all this develops, and we'll keep an eye on these things as the week goes by. So stay tuned here on State of State. He's Justin King. I'm Tom Hannafin. Thanks for tuning in. Thank you all so much for joining us. This episode and our entire library of shows is available now on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts. Please like, comment, subscribe, rate us, and turn on notifications. Follow us on social media at State of State Pod. Comment on our YouTube channel. And if you haven't done so already, you can become a member of our YouTube channel. For just 99 cents a month, you can get all upcoming episodes of State of State, plus our entire members-only playlist, ad-free, commercial-free. Hit the join button on our homepage or follow the link in the description of this podcast. State of State is presented by Bet Online and by Blue White Outfitters.